Adversity. How do you handle it when things aren't going like you expect? When you're disappointed? When times are tough? When life just seems to be out of your control? There's a story in the scripture about a guy named Joe who handled adversity by trusting God. Now, to understand how this story unfolds, you got to understand that Joe was his father's favorite son. He thought that he was going to live a privileged life because he was special. He was Daddy's favorite. Some of you may know what it was like. At Christmas time, when Joe's brothers opened their presents, you know, they'd open the stuffed animal, the pencil set, the Hot Wheels car. Joe would open the brand new shiny bike with the built-in iPod. I mean, Joe had it all. He was something special. But as you might imagine, Joe's brothers resented his favored treatment from his dad. In fact, they hated Joe because of it. And one day they concocted this plan that they were going to kill him. But instead, they threw him in a pit and sold him into slavery. Now, this was an unexpected turn of events for poor Joe. Life was not going as he had envisioned. In fact, Joe had thought life was going to go so perfectly smooth that someday even his family would be bowing down to him as the top dog. Instead, he was a slave in Egypt. But there, as a slave in Egypt, he made a decision. He was going to trust God as best he could, even in the midst of difficult circumstances. And as he became this slave, he worked so hard and trusted God, and God's favor was on him. He actually became the leader of the household of his master, Potiphar. And he was actually put in charge of all the affairs of Potiphar. Well, things took another turn for the worse. After his master's wife tried to unsuccessfully seduce him, she turned on him, and he got thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit. Now, at this point, maybe you think he would just say, forget it, I'm not going to trust God anymore, life stinks, I just give it up. But no, Joe made the choice, now in prison, that he was still going to trust God, and he would be the very best prisoner he could be. In fact, the prison warden took notice of him, made him essentially second in command of the entire prison. He was supervising the other prisoners. He was being the very best prisoner he could be and experience God's favor in prison. Well, while there, God gave him the ability to interpret some dreams. And he interpreted dreams, and one of his interpretations came true, and a man got released from prison and went to serve the king of Egypt. The story was supposed to have a happy ending now, in that he was supposed to mention Joe to the king so Joe could get released. One slight problem, though, the guy forgot. And there Joe sat in prison. But did he get bitter? I don't think so. Did he rail at God and scream at God? Doesn't seem like it. He continued to trust God. And at the right time, Joe was remembered, because the king of Egypt had a dream. And then they grabbed Joe, brought him to the king, and said, you've got to interpret this dream for the king. And it was a good thing he did, because Joe's interpretation warned Egypt that a great famine was coming. And the king recognized Joe's wisdom and actually put Joe in charge of all the internal affairs of Egypt. He became second in command of Egypt. And as a result, not only did the Egyptians get provided for during the famine, Joe's own family was able to travel to Egypt and get taken care of during that crisis. And God used the adversity in Joe's life to help his family and tens of thousands of people through the adversity of a famine. After Joe's dad died and they went through the burial process, Joe's brothers were in a state of panic because they thought, now Joe's going to get his revenge against us. But Joseph in Genesis 50 said something very, very insightful. Let me read you this verse from Genesis 50:20. Joseph said, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. You see, Job was able to look back and see how God was at work redeeming his circumstances. Would Job have chosen to be sold into slavery? No. Would he have wanted to have been thrown into prison? Of course not. Did he want to experience all that adversity? Certainly not. But did God use it in a special way? Without a doubt. God works redemptively. You see, I think Joseph modeled for us the great truth of Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him. Acknowledge God, and He will make your path straight, or He will direct your path. You see, that's what we need to learn. That's not my natural bent. My natural bent is when I go through adversity, when I go through a difficult time, I want to fix it. I want to solve the problem. I want to remove the difficult circumstances, or I want to get out of the difficult circumstances. But sometimes God is working in a special way in the midst of those circumstances, despite those circumstances, maybe even especially because of those circumstances. The question is, can we trust God in the midst of those difficult times? Even when we don't understand, even when we're disappointed, can we trust Him and lean not on our own understanding? See, Job is an example of shining in the midst of difficult circumstances, and you and I can learn to shine too.